There's a moment when the world slows down and you realize you're not alone anymore. I remember the first time I saw her. It was late summer in Asheville, North Carolina. The sun was golden, lazy clouds drifting over the Blue Ridge Mountains. I had just moved into a small cabin on the edge of town to finally finish the novel I kept promising I'd write. I didn't believe in fate, not really, but that day made me question everything. Her name was Emily Hart. She walked into my life wearing a faded denim jacket and a smile like she'd stolen it from a warmer world. I met her at the Juniper Cafe, this tiny place with creaky floors and coffee strong enough to rewrite your soul. I was sitting near the window, scribbling nonsense into a leather journal when she asked if she could sit across from me. Every other table was full. "Mind if I steal this seat?" she asked, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Only if you're okay with secondhand writer's block," I replied. She laughed. God, that laugh. It was like the first breath after a storm. We talked for hours. About everything. About nothing. I found out she was a wildlife photographer, part-time. The rest of the time she worked at the nature center nearby, helping injured owls and orphaned foxes find their way back to the wild. Her hands were always moving when she talked, animated, passionate, alive. She had a scar on her wrist shaped like a crescent moon from when a hawk panicked and lashed out. She told me that story like it was a love letter. Our lives intertwined faster than I could understand. I started meeting her for sunrise hikes. She taught me how to read the forest, how to listen to the wind. We'd lie on our backs in a field of tall grass, pointing out constellations. She said the stars felt less lonely when someone else could see them too. I didn't even notice how fast I was falling. There was something about Emily. Not just her smile or her voice or the way she'd get overly excited about things like moss or mushroom colonies. It was deeper. Like she carried some secret joy the rest of us had forgotten. She made the world feel intentional. Like everything led to this. We kissed for the first time under a canopy of fireflies. I didn't plan it. It just happened, like gravity. She leaned in, her fingers gently resting on my chest, and whispered, "I think I like you more than I should." And I whispered back, "I was already yours the second you sat down." From that night on, we were inseparable. Autumn came. The leaves turned, but we didn't. Every moment was a memory I didn't realize I was collecting until much later. Bonfires. Rainy afternoons wrapped in blankets. Her stealing my flannel shirts and pretending they were ours. The way she'd stare at animals like she was trying to speak their language. I watched her photograph a red fox once. There was a kind of reverence in her expression. Like she was capturing a piece of wonder. One night, during a thunderstorm, she told me she believed some people were made from different stuff. Like we're not all meant to last forever, she said, tracing my palm with her fingers. Some people, we're just here to remind others how beautiful life can be. Even if it's only for a little while. I remember holding her tighter that night. Like maybe if I loved her hard enough, I could keep her longer. But at the time, those words didn't scare me. At the time, I thought we had forever. Some losses don't come all at once. They arrive slowly, like twilight creeping into day. I started noticing it in the little things. Emily wasn't waking up with the same spark. She'd stare out the window longer than usual, like her mind was drifting somewhere I couldn't follow. At first, I told myself it was just stress or the changing seasons. She brushed it off too, said she was tired, maybe catching a bug. But her eyes told a different story. They were still full of light. But that light was flickering. One morning, we went hiking up Black Balsam Knob, our favorite spot. The wind was colder than usual, and she struggled to keep pace. Emily never struggled. She used to glide over rocks like she was part of the mountain itself. Halfway up, she stopped suddenly, gripping her knees, breath shallow. I reached for her. Are you okay?" She forced a smile. "Yeah, just winded. I'm fine." But her hand trembled in mine the whole way back down. The next few weeks blurred. Some days she was completely herself, laughing, dancing barefoot in the kitchen, teasing me about my awful handwriting. But other days, she was distant. Fading. Like she was trying to stay tethered to this world and slipping inch by inch. One night, I found her in the bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor. She looked pale, her eyes rimmed with shadows. I rushed to her, heart pounding. "Talk to me," I whispered. "Please, just tell me what's happening." She didn't answer right away, just leaned into me silent. Then, finally, she said, barely above a whisper, "I didn't want to tell you, because once I did, it would become real." I froze. The world felt like it stopped breathing. She pulled something from her hoodie pocket. A letter, crumpled at the corners, medical printout peeking through. I opened it with shaking hands. The words swam in front of me, but I found the ones that mattered. Idiopathic neurodegenerative disorder. Progressive. Terminal. I looked up at her, my chest hollow. "How long?" She looked away. "They're not sure. Months, maybe a year, maybe less." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even cry. Emily just looked at me with those unbreakable eyes and said, "I didn't want this to be our story. I didn't want you to remember me this way." And that's when something inside me broke. Because I knew, no matter what happened, I would remember her this way. Every way. The laughter and the silence. The fireflies and the broken moments. The beauty and the pain. All of it. From then on, time felt like a thief. The days passed, each one stealing a little more of her. She grew weaker. Her memory sometimes flickered, names slipping from her tongue like sand. I kept smiling for her, cooking her favorite meals, reading to her at night, even when she'd drift off mid-sentence. We held on to normal like it was a life raft, but it was slipping through our fingers. Then came the turning point. It was the first snow of the season. I found her sitting outside in nothing but a sweater, her bare feet in the snow, eyes closed. I rushed out, panic choking my throat. "What are you doing?" I shouted, wrapping a blanket around her. She looked up, calm. I wanted to feel something real. I can't tell what's dream and what's not anymore. That night, we ended up in the ER. Her vitals dropped. The doctors spoke in quiet, heavy tones. And I realized something I hadn't dared to admit until then. I was losing her. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. You don't notice the exact moment you start disappearing. It's not a loud thing. It's quiet, like grief. After the hospital visit, something changed not just in Emily, but in me. I stopped writing. I couldn't sit still long enough. My thoughts were noise. Static. My journal stayed closed, my desk gathered dust. The words that once defined me no longer mattered. There was only one story now, and I was living it in slow motion, helpless to rewrite the ending. I tried to hold it together for her. I smiled when she looked at me. I cracked jokes. I made breakfast even though I barely ate. But inside, I was splintering. Each morning I woke up to find her a little further away. Her memory fading. Her laughter quieter. Her body shrinking beneath blankets that used to be too warm. And I was becoming a ghost in my own life. I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Hollow cheeks. Eyes rimmed in red. I kept replaying our conversations in my head over and over, like maybe I could find a line I missed, some sign, some clue, some way to stop this. Sometimes at night, after she fell asleep, I'd walk for hours through the woods near our cabin. I didn't even bring a flashlight. I didn't care if I got lost. I was already lost. One evening, I found myself back at the Juniper Cafe, the place where it all began. I hadn't been there in months. The girl at the counter didn't recognize me. I ordered 2 coffees out of habit. I sat at our table by the window and stared at the empty seat across from me until the coffee went cold. A man I used to be might have broken down right then. But the man I was becoming, he didn't cry anymore. He just endured. I started documenting everything about Emily, not for the world, but for myself. Photos, videos, voice memos. I wanted to capture her laugh, her gestures, the way she said my name. Every little thing. Because deep down, I was terrified that one day, even my memories would betray me. I asked her questions, too, about her childhood, her dreams, her fears. I recorded everything on an old tape recorder. One night, as I lay next to her, listening to her slow breathing, I played it back. "I think love isn't about forever," she said in one of the recordings. "It's about how deeply you feel someone while you still can." I remember staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to hold myself together with those words. But I was unraveling. The doctors offered options. Palliative care. In-home nursing. Hospice. I nodded to everything. I didn't care about logistics. I just wanted her safe. Comfortable. Here. I called her sister, her old friends, even her estranged father. People started visiting more often. Some came out of guilt. Some out of love. Emily handled it all with grace, always smiling, even when I could see how tired she was. But me? I was disappearing into the margins. I couldn't stand the sympathy in people's eyes. The way they looked at me like he's so strong, when really, I was ashes held together by duty. My world had shrunk to 4 walls and a hospital bed we set up in the living room. There was one night I'll never forget. It was storming. Emily was asleep. I walked outside into the rain, barefoot, soaked instantly. I screamed into the trees. Not words. Just sound. A raw animal howl that tore my throat. I screamed because I didn't know what else to do. Because I couldn't scream in front of her. I was grieving a person who was still alive. And it was turning me into something unrecognizable. But I didn't leave. I never once thought about running. Because love, real love, it doesn't walk away just because it hurts. So I stayed. Even as I faded into a shadow of who I was. Some truths live in the shadows. But once you see them, you can't look away. It was supposed to be routine. Emily had another checkup scheduled, just more scans, more numbers, more doctors shaking their heads and trying not to look too sorry. I hated those rooms. The smell of antiseptic, the coldness in every corner. But I went with her always. I held her hand. I nodded at the words I didn't understand. But this time, something didn't sit right. After her appointment, as we sat in the parking lot, she turned to me and said, "They keep changing my medication. Every time I ask why, they just say it's protocol. But I don't feel any better. I feel worse." That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words gnawed at me. I started digging, not because I thought I'd find anything, but because I needed something to do. Something other than watch the person I loved disappear. I pulled out her medical records. Every test, every prescription, every report we had. I compared dates, doses, changes in medication. And the more I looked, the more cracks I saw. Dosages that didn't make sense. Medications prescribed off-label. A pattern of subtle, but dangerous inconsistency. I reached out to a friend of mine, Jared, a pharmacist I hadn't spoken to since college. "Is it normal," I asked over the phone, "for a patient to be prescribed this combination of meds with this kind of diagnosis?" There was a long pause. "No," he said finally. "That's not normal at all. That cocktail could actually worsen neurological symptoms over time." My blood turned to ice. I asked him to look deeper. He agreed, reluctantly. 2 days later, he sent me a file. A breakdown of recent cases at the same hospital. Several patients, same age range, similar symptoms, had been given nearly identical prescriptions. Some had declined rapidly. Some had died. The doctors were calling it idiopathic, which meant, we don't know what's causing it. But what if they did? I took the file and drove straight to the hospital. I demanded to see her neurologist. They brushed me off. I wouldn't leave. I stood in the lobby for hours, asking every nurse, every admin, every passing lab tech if they knew why these meds were being used. Finally, I was escorted to a small office by someone from patient relations. She smiled too much. She spoke carefully. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I understand your concern, but we assure you everything in your partner's treatment plan follows federal protocol." That's when I realized they knew. And they were covering it up. That night, I told Emily everything. She didn't speak. She just sat there, eyes wide, processing. "They're not just letting you fade," I whispered. "They helped you fade." I gave her the choice. "We can go public. We can fight this. Or, we can walk away from it all. Your call." Her voice was steady, despite the weight of what I'd told her. "If they did this to me," she said, "they'll do it to others. We can't stay quiet." And just like that, the man I had become, the quiet, grieving shadow, stepped into the fire. I went to the press. I leaked the documents. I told our story. It caught like dry brush in a storm. Local news. Then national. Whistleblowers came forward. A silent scandal unraveled before the world's eyes. Turns out, a pharmaceutical partner had been funding experimental off-label testing in exchange for generous hospital grants. Patients like Emily were never told. Lawsuits were filed. The hospital faced criminal charges. A class action suit formed. And Emily became the face of it all. She was too weak to attend court. But we recorded a video of her testimony. She looked straight into the camera and said, "They took pieces of my life, but I won't let them take my voice." And when the verdict came, guilty, negligence, unlawful experimentation, I looked at her and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fire. Not the fire of survival. The fire of justice. We didn't win everything, but we stopped them. And somehow, in that, we reclaimed a part of ourselves. But the damage was already done. Her condition wouldn't reverse. The truth saved others, but it didn't save her. Sometimes love doesn't make you whole. Sometimes it breaks you open and builds someone new. After the trial, the cameras left. The reporters stopped calling. The world moved on. But we couldn't. Emily was thinner now, fragile in a way that made every touch feel sacred. Her hair, once wild and tangled from hikes and rainstorms, was now soft and wispy against the pillow. She no longer stood by the windows to greet the morning. The days blurred, and so did her voice. But I stayed. Not out of obligation. Not even just love. I stayed because I couldn't imagine not staying. I had changed. People began calling me brave and relentless and an advocate. I wasn't any of those things. I was just a man who loved a woman who was dying. But love had stripped away who I used to be: a dreamer, a writer, a man with silly hopes about book deals and mountain cabins, and left behind something harder, sharper. I was no longer who I had been. I had become someone else entirely. I learned how to feed her through a tube. I learned how to administer meds at 2 a.m. How to read every twitch of her hand, every wince in her eyes. I could tell if she was in pain just by the way she blinked. I became a nurse, a guardian, a protector. I hadn't written in almost a year. The man who once lived through words now lived through watching. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. There was a cost, though. The mirror showed it first. My face older. Eyes dimmer. I looked like my father. I had lost friends, burned bridges with publishers who thought I'd wasted my prime. I didn't return calls. I stopped going to weddings, birthdays. It was like grief had put me in exile, and I'd accepted the sentence. But I never lost her. Even as her body gave out, her mind flickered back to me, sometimes just for a few seconds. I'd sit beside her, hold her hand, and she'd squeeze once. That meant I remember you. Sometimes she'd whisper things. Not always full sentences. But I learned to read between the words. One night, when the machines beeped a little slower than usual, she looked at me and said, "You look different." I smiled. I think I became someone else. She nodded, barely. Someone stronger. That was the last clear sentence she ever said to me. It hit me like lightning. Because she was right. Love had transformed me, not into a hero, not into a martyr, but into something I never thought I could be. A man who could hold suffering without running from it. I had stopped trying to fix her, to save her. That was never the point. The point was to walk beside her. Through every storm, every silence. I had become someone else. Not despite the pain, but because of it. And yet, even as I changed, I never stopped missing who I used to be. That version of me, the one who laughed more, who believed that love was always bright and easy. Now I knew better. Love wasn't easy. Love was a battlefield, a devotion, a transformation. And still, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever known. You think love ends with goodbye. But the truth is, real love doesn't end. It just changes shape. Emily died on a quiet morning in April. There was no drama. No final gasp. Just silence. I woke up before the sun, her hand still in mine. The light was soft, just brushing the windowsill, warming her cheeks. I knew before the monitors told me. Her hand wasn't warm anymore. There's no guidebook for that moment. No words big enough to fill the silence that follows. I kissed her forehead. Whispered, "Thank you for everything." Then I sat there. For a long time. Not crying. Just still. We had lived through fire. Through silence. Through injustice. Through fear. And now, she was free. And I was still here. People talk about grief like a wave. That's true. But what they don't tell you is how quiet the world becomes after. Like everything you once knew goes mute. The birds still sing. Cars still pass. But none of it sounds the same. I buried her near the woods behind our cabin. The place she loved most. We planted a red maple tree at her headstone. She always said she liked trees that knew how to change. After the funeral, people asked me what I would do now. Would I go back to writing? Move away? Start over? I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth was, I didn't want to go back to the man I used to be. He was gone. Buried in the same ground as her. But I did write again. Eventually. Not novels. Not fiction. I wrote her. Her story. Our story. I wrote for those who had loved and lost. For those who stood at the edge of someone else's pain and chose to stay anyway. And I wrote one line that I'll never forget. Love and pain are not opposites. They're twins. Born of the same fire. I learned that the deeper you love, the deeper you hurt. But that doesn't mean love isn't worth it. In fact, it means it's the only thing that is. Pain carves space in your soul, but love is what fills it. Over and over again. That's what Emily taught me. Even now, years later, I still feel her. In the rustling leaves. In the golden light before sunset. In every quiet moment I once feared. I'm not whole. I don't think I ever will be. But I am alive. And I carry her with me in everything. Not like a wound. Like a rhythm. And in that rhythm, I still hear her laugh. Still see her eyes. Still feel her love. And maybe that's the point. That love doesn't promise forever. But it promises to matter. And if it hurts, it's only because it meant something worth remembering.